You may be seated. Okay, let the record reflect that the defendant is present along with counsel for the defendant, assistant state attorney, both sides ready to proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Bench is ready, Your Honor.
Okay, let's return the doctor to the witness stand. Before we bring the jury in, as I indicated to the gallery yesterday, please do not make any facial expressions, gestures, sounds, or anything of the nature when photographs are shown. If you do that, you will be immediately ejected, also with the possibility of contempt proceedings done by me. Okay, let's return the jury. Okay, state recognized presence of jury,
Yes, sir.
defense, and members of the jury. Did you heed all of my previous admonitions? Okay, and good morning. All right, Mr. Ashton, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Rutz.
Good morning.
I believe where we left off, we were going through photographs of various items that were collected by Investigator Hansen from the scene where the remains were found. I believe the next one we're up to is State's Exhibit DN for identification, next photograph. Do you see State's Exhibit DN on your screen?
I do.
And do you recognize that as a photograph of, I believe, the front of the pair of shorts we looked at the back of? Yes,
That's correct.
And does it fairly and accurately depict the appearance of those items?
It is.
This time you ought to move into evidence State's Exhibit DN.
It will be received in evidence that states numbered.
233.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Now, Doctor, this particular garment, obviously in the photograph, it appears to have a number of holes in it.
Yes, it does.
Having looked at it, in three dimension, did it appear that the shorts had been torn, cut, or the product of insect and predator activity?
Well, I can't rule out that some of the defects that I see in the material occurred before the decomposition, but certainly a lot of what I see here is consistent with clothing that we see in a case of decomposition.
Right. Thank you. Could I have the next photograph, please? Do you recognize this as a photograph of the tag of the item we just saw showing, actually the first of two tags on it?
Yes,
And is it an accurate photograph of the tag?
it is.
This time you're going to move to evidence State's Exhibit DO. DO.
It will be received in evidence that states numbered.
234.
May I publish? I'm sorry.
You may.
This just shows the maker's label off the shorts. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Circo.
Yes,
You shop at Target much? Not for kids' clothes, huh?
and not usually.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. Next one, please. DP. Is this a photograph of just another aspect of the tag, sort of the second tag?
It is.
This time you got to move into evidence State's Exhibit DP.
What says the defense? It will be received in evidence as.
Exhibit number 235.
May I publish?
You may publish.
And Doctor, again, this is the second tag in the shorts, indicating its composition.
Correct.
And may I have the next photograph, please? DQ. Doctor, is this a photograph of the backside of that tag?
It is.
This time, moving to evidence State's Exhibit DQ. DQ, like Dairy Queen.
Okay, it will be received in evidence that states numbered.
236.
And may I publish?
You may publish.
Again, this is the washing instruction label from the shorts.
That's correct.
All right. Could I have the next photograph, please? DR. Now, amongst the various debris that was found in and amongst the bag, were there some letters found?
Yes, there were.
And did they appear to be letters, the kind that would be on a shirt, or child's shirt, perhaps?
Yes, they were.
Did you attempt to sort of reconstruct them in a manner that made words?
To some extent.
Okay, something. And is it what this is, a photograph of those letters put together in a way that made words that seemed to make sense?
That's correct.
This time, Your Honor, moving to evidence, States Exhibit DR.
Be received in evidence, the states numbered.
237,
I may have published.
You may publish.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to publish in split screen States Exhibit 13 in evidence. Mr. President, is it possible to zoom in on the this? Let the jury have a moment to look at that. Did everyone finish? Okay. All right. Let me just give me just a single screen of the next exhibit in our order. Doctor, do you recognize this photograph as a photograph of the remnants of a shirt, for lack of a better word, that were found amongst the debris that Mr. Hansen brought in?
Yes, I do.
And it shows the tag.
Yes.
This time, moving to evidence, States Exhibit DS for identification.
Be received in evidence, the states numbered.
238,
May I publish?
You may publish.
Right. May I have the next exhibit, please? DT. This is a photograph of the tag of that, a close-up of the tag on the item we just saw. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Time moving to evidence, States Exhibit DT.
Be received in evidence, the states numbered.
239,
May I publish?
You may publish.
In this photograph, Doctor, we can see the size of 3T on this photograph. Is that correct?
Correct.
Move on to the last photograph. This would be DU. Do you recognize this photograph?
I do.
What are these items, to the best that you were able to tell?
The lower item, I believe, is a blanket or portion of a blanket, and the upper item is a portion of a fabric that I was not able to identify.
It was just in with the other debris.
That's correct.
This time, Your Honor, moving to evidence, States Exhibit DU.
Be received in evidence, the states numbered.
240,
May I publish?
You may publish.
Now, Doctor, once you completed this initial examination and photographing of all these different items, I believe you may already ask about this last again. The tape that you identified yesterday, was that released to the FBI to be sent to the lab for analysis?
It was.
At what point did your active involvement in this investigation end?
I think shortly after the initial examination, I did have some limited involvement in Dr. Garavalia's examination. Would have been probably on the following Monday. And I had two visits, I believe, to the recovery scene over that weekend. But after that, my involvement was approximately the same involvement that someone else in the office would have had. It was Dr. Garavalia's case.
When was it that she returned and effectively took back responsibility for the case?
I believe she returned Friday afternoon,
And that what the 11th was what day of the week?
Thursday.
Thursday. So she would have the following day in the afternoon.
I believe so, yes.
And from then on, was your involvement just sort of assisting or perhaps seeing what was going on?
Correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Let's see. You are a board-certified medical examiner, are you?
Forensic pathologist.
Forensic pathologist. What does that mean?
What does board certification mean, or what
Well,
does...
what does forensic pathologist mean?
Well, pathology is, in its simplest form, it means the study of disease. And a pathologist is a physician who most commonly is involved in the diagnosis of disease states, either by analyzing tissue or body fluids. Pathologists also perform autopsies in order to determine a cause of death. A forensic pathologist is a subspecialty pathologist, and forensic pathology is particularly involved with investigation of death in order to determine the cause of death and the manner of death.
So you're a scientist.
I would not use that term, but many do.
Medical scientist.
You could use it.
Now, this particular case, before the remains were found, you were already aware of the whole surrounding hoopla about the missing child, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
And it was common discussion within your office, wasn't it?
It was discussed. I don't know if it was common.
You knew that the media was clamoring all over the place about this case, didn't you?
Yes, but before there's remains are found, the medical examiner's office really is a spectator.
But when you received the announcement that the remains or suspect remains had been found, of course, there was more and more conversation in the office.
Correct.
And in the ordinary course of business, Chief Investigator Hansen responded to the scene
Correct.
before you did.
Correct.
He took pictures.
He did.
He surveyed the scene.
He did.
He made some supplemental reports
He did.
and came back to you.
That's correct.
You were in charge.
That's correct.
You were the deputy medical examiner on call basically at that time.
That's correct.
Dr. Garavaglia was gone elsewhere.
She was.
Dr. Garavaglia came back into town and took over the case, didn't she?
That's correct.
You know why?
At the time, I believe that she felt that it was important for her to be involved because she had a very good working relationship with the law enforcement and also the ancillary personnel that would be needed in the case. And I was relatively new in the office, and I did not have that relationship.
And an additional reason you have mentioned is because of the high media profile of this case.
Well, I don't think that alone had a bearing on it. It is a complicated case, a case that requires the use of investigations that are not actual parts of our office. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think in a case like that, where there is the requirement for the use of ancillary personnel and other investigations that are not based in our office, that was reasonable on her part to coordinate that. She would have been involved at any rate, even if it were my case.
But you were fully capable of handling that case, the autopsy, making the reports, conclusions, and opinions, weren't you?
I believe so.
And you've done it. many, many times before.
Well,
this.
nothing, not under exactly the same circumstances, but similar.
Now, you had some conversation yesterday with Mr. Ashton, your testimony regarding the duct tape,
Correct.
and looked at various pictures.
That's right.
And if I recall correctly, I'm sorry.
Kind of tilt the screen so they can't.
There's no picture on there, is there?
No, there's no picture on there, but she just wants to make sure that she's not supposed to see.
Thank you very much. There was no duct tape on the left side of the skull, was there?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
There was no duct tape on the left side of the skull.
Well, what do you mean by on?
You have described in photos yesterday, and I'm going to avoid showing them if we can, but that there was some duct tape adhered to a little bit of hair mat on the right side of the skull and then laying forward. Remember?
Yes.
All right. There wasn't any duct tape when you found or were presented with these remains on the left side, was there?
Well, I think it extended beyond the midline up to the left, certainly, but it wasn't attached. The tape itself was not attached to the skull.
And there wasn't any on the back of the skull either, was there?
No.
So there was no duct tape around the skull, was there, sir?
Completely encircling it?
Correct.
No, sir.
And the only place that the duct tape was adhered to was part of the hair mat on the right side bottom area of the skull, correct?
No, I think there were points of adherence also on the left side.
Did you remove the duct tape
I did.
and you cut it loose from the hair?
I did.
And then did you examine it?
We took a photograph of it, looked at it briefly, but I didn't conduct any examination of the duct tape itself.
You didn't do any microscopic examination for it?
No, sir.
You do anything to swab so you might preserve some potential DNA evidence from the duct tape?
I did not.
Were you careful in handling the duct tape, sir?
I was.
Did you wear protective gloves?
I did.
And were you suited up in full protective clothing in the medical examiner's office?
Yes, sir.
And did you carefully take that duct tape and put it in an evidence bag of some sort?
Yes, sir.
And then send it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, their lab, for testing?
It was released to a field agent from the FBI.
Now, there was no human tissue of any kind on that duct tape, was there?
Nothing that I could identify as human tissue.
Now, you examined these remains pretty carefully, did you not, doctor?
It was a preliminary examination, and I wouldn't say that I did a careful examination of the remains. My goal at that point was twofold: to provide material to the FBI lab for identification purposes, and to provide the duct tape for analysis.
And in your examination, whether it be preliminary or otherwise, isn't it true that you found no evidence of trauma of any kind of these remains?
I did not see any evidence of trauma.
You didn't see any evidence of a broken bone?
There were portions of bone that were disrupted, but I did not analyze them to make a determination as to what may have caused that disruption.
You didn't see any evidence of closed reductions of fractures in any of the bones, did you?
I did not.
Tell the jury what that means, or a closed reduction.
Overruled.
Could you repeat the question?
Tell the jury what is meant by the term closed reduction.
You mean a healing fracture?
Right.
A healing fracture is simply an irregularity, usually a nodular irregularity in a portion of a bone, which is an indication of a prior injury.
And there was no indication that you could find of any prior injury. Isn't that true, sir?
I didn't see any.
Now, in the process of this autopsy, did you resect the calvarium?
I did not.
Would you tell the jury what that means, please, sir?
I suppose that you're referring to cutting through the bone of the skull and removing the top of the skull, or the calvarium.
That was not done in your presence, or to your knowledge, was it, sir?
It was not done.
If that body had been found 4 months before it was, would you have expected to have available more forensic evidence than you did?
Yeah, it's possible.
Mr. Ashton asked you about and showed pictures of various items of clothing,
Correct.
all of which you recovered from one of the bags or some of the bags that were brought to you.
Yes, sir.
You remember what size the shorts were, sir, according to their tag?
I believe 24 months.
Were you involved in any of the decisions to seek further expert examinations of these remains?
No, sir.
Did you participate with the examination of the remains with Dr. Schultz?
Only the initial examination that occurred on the late afternoon and early evening of the 11th.
Dr. Schultz is an anthropologist, correct?
He is a forensic anthropologist.
He works at the University of Central Florida,
Correct.
PhD.
Yes, sir.
Did you also participate in any regard, sir, with examinations of toxicology?
I did not.
Are you aware that, in fact, requests for toxicology testing and screening were made in this case?
Sustain.
Did you jointly sign the final report of autopsy in this case with Dr. Garavaglia?
I did not.
You know who Dr. Bruce Goldberger is?
He is a toxicologist.
Did you have any involvement with Dr. Goldberger in connection with this case?
I did not.
An issue apparently was made in the beginning of your testimony, and part of it, regarding the location of the mandible. Recall that?
Yes.
Recall looking at pictures of the mandible,
Yes.
meaning the bottom jaw?
Correct.
And if I recall, you said it was held in place by the hair and roots, as shown in the photographs. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And when you picked up the remains from the table where they had been presented, did you hold the skull in your hand, sir?
Yes.
And the mandible didn't fall off, did it, sir?
It did not.
And when it was moved around in the different positions on the examining table, it didn't come off, did it, sir?
It did not.
You have just moments ago talked about the duties that you have, and that is to determine the cause and manner of death, correct?
That's correct.
That's a medical examiner's job.
Primarily, yes.
You do not know from your examination and the evidence the cause of death in this case, do you, sir?
I did not make a determination of cause and manner of death in this case.
My question is very specific, doctor. You do not know the cause of death in this case, do you, sir?
I do not.
And the manner of death in this case has been officially determined by Dr. G as a homicide, correct?
That's correct.
Is the term homicide a scientific term?
Sustained.
As a medical examiner, are you called upon to make the decisions of both cause and manner of death?
Sustained.
You have not rendered an opinion as to the manner of death in this case, have you, sir?
I have not.
Will I have just a moment, Your Honor? Thank you very much, sir. I have no more questions.
Any redirect?
We have published State's Exhibit 218, which was CF for identification. May I publish that to the jury? It's in evidence, Your Honor.
You may.
Doctor, we looked at this photograph before. Mr. Mason has. Which side of the head or face is this?
That is the left.
That's the left side.
Correct.
So that is what you were referring to about the tape going on the left side as well as the right.
Yes.
Could I have publish State's Exhibit 220CU in evidence? And this is you described where the tape is being lifted up. What side of the face is conveniently circled again?
Right side.
Right side. So this shows the tape on both the left side and the right side.
That's correct.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, may the witness be excused. You said, may the witness be excused.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, doctor. You may be excused, sir.
Thank you.
State may call their next witness.
Dr. John Schultz.
solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
John J. Schultz, SCHULTZ.
You may proceed.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Would you please tell us, how are you employed?
Excuse me?
How are you employed? What do you do?
Oh, I'm an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Central Florida.
And how long have you held that position?
I started at UCF 2003 as an assistant professor and was promoted 2009, 2010.
And in what department do you work?
Anthropology?
Do you have a subspecialty within the field of anthropology?
Yes. Through my education, my specialty would be forensic anthropology, forensic archaeology.
Okay. Can you just give us some of your educational background
Sure.
in that field that led you to your present position?
My undergraduate degree is from State University of New York at Stony Brook. The degree is in anthropology.
Let me ask you, for benefit of the court reporter, slow down just a little bit.
Oh, okay. No problem.
You tend to talk just a little bit
Yes.
fast.
All right. My undergraduate degree is from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. The degree is in anthropology. My focus was biological anthropology. I have a master's degree in human biology from University of Indianapolis. For that program, we focused in human anatomy, skeletal anatomy, forensic archaeology, as well as taphonomy. I have a PhD from the University of Florida in anthropology. My specialty was forensic anthropology, forensic archaeology, and while at the University of Florida, I spent 5 years at the Human Identification Lab, which is a forensic anthropology lab.
Tell us, if you will, what the difference is between forensic anthropology and forensic archaeology.
Okay. As a forensic anthropologist, my specialty in that area would be study of the human skeleton. So we have courses in human anatomy, human skeletal anatomy, human variation, other types of biological courses. For forensic Sure. The whole answer? Sure. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, no problem. Sorry about that.
that's all right. We'll remind you.
Okay.
You're not the first.
Can you please repeat the question?
My God, I can't remember it. I think I was just asking you the...
Between
Yes.
forensic anthropology and
Forensic archaeology.
Okay. All right. As a forensic anthropologist, our specialty would be studying the human skeleton. As a forensic archaeologist, we would have a specialist dealing with going out to the field, working with law enforcement, collecting skeletal remains, interpreting taphonomy at the site. Within the definition of forensic anthropology, locating and recovering human remains is part of that definition. I also include myself as my specialty because my research area has specifically been in forensic archaeology and field methods.
And you used a term called taphonomy. What
Yes.
is taphonomy?
Taphonomy is studying what happens after a body's been after death. So that could be studying changes to the skeleton itself, but changes of how the skeleton may have been dispersed at a site.
All right. You mentioned that you spent 5 years at the Human Identification Laboratory. Could you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that is,
Okay.
what they do there?
There are a number of prominent PhD programs in forensic anthropology in the United States where they have laboratories where they do numerous cases. So the lab at the University of Florida is known specifically for providing a service throughout the state of Florida to medical examiners, even the state archaeologists, that when there are skeletonized remains, they can be sent to that lab and analyzed. And so as a graduate student, that's a wonderful place to go to school because there's a continuous flow of skeletal cases, and that would be part of our training as a graduate student.
So you actually get cases from all around the state of Florida that come through the laboratory at
Yeah,
Gainesville.
most of the state, there are more people now that work in the state, some of which have come out of that lab that may be doing some of those localized areas, but that state deals primarily with the University of Florida.
And who did you study under at the...
While I was at the University of Florida, I studied with Dr. Anthony Falsetti was my dissertation advisor, and Dr. Michael Warren was also in residence there while I was a graduate student.
Is there a particular area in forensic archaeology that you specialize in?
Yeah. My specialty, would be detecting human remains. My dissertation involved using ground-penetrating radar, which is a tool used in archaeology. It's also used in many other areas, and it's a remote sensing tool, non-invasive. So we're going to use the tool to try to locate changes in the ground. And one change in the ground could be a burial at a cemetery. It could be an archaeological site. It can also be a possible grave. So my dissertation and the research I continued at UCF has involved using remote sensing tools, particularly GPR.
All right. Now, when you came to work at UCF, did you enter into a working relationship with the medical examiner, the District 9 medical examiner?
Yes. When I first arrived at UCF, I was making contact with the local community to continue doing forensic work. As part of a professor, it's expected at UCF, UCF's a metropolitan university, we are expected to work with the community. And all of the professors I've worked with have worked with the community. So it's something that would be expected from us. So I made contact with the medical examiner as well as the sheriff's department, and I was able to start doing skeletal cases and assist with recoveries on an as-needed basis.
Now, prior to your coming to UCF and making yourself available to the local law enforcement agencies, was there a local forensic anthropologist working here, or did they have to call people from Gainesville?
Dr. Dupre is a biological anthropologist at the university. She's primarily a bioarchaeologist. She studies skeletal remains from archaeological contexts. I think she probably did. Oh, no problem. Sorry about that. All right. Dr. Dupre, who is primarily a bioarchaeologist, would also do some of the forensic work. I think she did a few forensic cases. And then I think they also had sent some cases to Gainesville.
Okay. But there wasn't a local forensic anthropologist until you got here to fill that.
But she was at the university, but she wasn't working with the scope of the types of cases that I do with the medical examiner.
All right. So did you develop a relationship with the medical examiner's office where you would be their sort of on-call forensic anthropologist if they needed it?
Yes. So I served as a local resource with them. So if skeletal remains were found, they could call me up, and I could be readily available based on my schedule at the University of Central Florida.
Now, around December the 11th of 2008, did you receive a notification from the medical examiner's office that your services might be needed?
I received a phone call from Steve Hansen, and I think Dr. G had also called me that day.
And did they inform you that there might be skeletal remains that you could assist in examining?
Yes, I was called to ask if I was able to go to the scene that day to participate in the initial recovery.
Now, were you present at the scene when the skull and the first bones that were found were actually removed?
No, the first day I was not available. I was not available to go to the scene, excuse me. That was finals week at University of Central Florida. I had to do an osteology final, osteology study of the skeleton, and I had to make sure I had coverage for my final before I was actually able to leave. And by that time, I think everything had already been recovered.
By everything, you mean the initial?
Correct, the initial,
okay.
Yes.
Did you then go, so where did you go to start assisting in this investigation?
I went directly to the medical examiner's office.
All right. Now, when you arrived there, was the skull had it already arrived at the medical examiner's office? Do you recall?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Okay.
If the material was already there.
What is your first recollection of seeing the skull or what it was contained in?
Well, I remember looking in the bag and seeing the skull in the bag. I did see some duct tape. I did not want to interfere with the duct tape, so I essentially tore the corners of the bag to lay the bag flat so the skull was not handled in any way.
All right. Were you present when the initial photography was done of the skull sitting in its position in the bag, once the bag is torn away?
Correct, yes, I was there.
So that was documented before it was moved in any way?
Yeah, and that was documented. I was there when it was documented, and then X-rays were already, I don't remember when the X-rays were completed, since I was assisting, I was not in charge. And I do remember at one point during the photography process, I held the skull up so photographs could be taken of the underside of the skull itself.
If we could publish State's Exhibit and Evidence 218. Is this one of the photographs that you're referring to where you are holding the skull so that it can be photographed?
Correct. Right at the very top of the screen, I guess it's where the blue color changes. That should be a glove of mine holding it up.
Up here?
Correct.
Well, it didn't quite work, but we got it. We got the message. All right. And again, did you observe the things that are being photographed here as far as the position of the tape and the jaw and the hair mat, et cetera?
Yes.
Let's also look at 220, which is CU, was CU. Oh, I'm sorry. That was from that's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Now, with reference to the mandible, was the mandible still? Is there a term of art called anatomical position within your field?
Yes, anatomical position would be the normal position. If we're referring to the skeleton, the normal position the bones would be when somebody would be during life.
All right. I'm going to have him talk about it a little bit. Now, was the mandible, when the skull came in close to anatomical position?
Close. It was close.
Okay.
Okay.
Was that surprising to you?
To see a mandible still retained on the bottom of the skull from a surface recovery, yes, that was surprising.
Why is that surprising?
Generally, there needs to be something there to hold the mandible in place. Just through gravity, the mandible will normally separate once the soft tissues are no longer present.
And based upon your examination of this, what was holding the mandible in place in this circumstance?
From this examination would have been if we see from the picture that's still up there, it would have been the hair that had moved to the base of the skull.
Right. Was there anything else in the hair?
Well, we can see right in the picture here there is some leaf litter and it looks like some roots that were there.
How about the tape? What did that have any involvement in holding the mandible into place that you could see?
No, because I think the tape was adhered to the hair, but I don't recall it holding the mandible in place in this view.
All right. I'm going to unpublish the photograph at this time. Let's just take the photograph off. Now, during your examination of the initial bones that were brought in, did you find anything indicating evidence of any kind of trauma to the bones?
No, there was no evidence of trauma.
Now, did you participate in planning a thorough excavation of the site where the skull was found?
Okay. I provided an advisory role to the Sheriff's Department, but I would not call it an excavation because an excavation would interpret we were, normally we say excavation, we're out there with trowels and we're pulling back subsurface soil layers. In this instance, I would call this a recovery because the material primarily was not buried. There were some items, but the majority of the material was underneath the leaf litter throughout the site.
All right. Now, what was the plan for recovery? How was that done?
Okay. I had, on the 12th, I arrived at the scene in the morning and talked with Susan Mears, who was the crime scene supervisor, and we talked about how to proceed with processing this type of scene. And this scene posed numerous difficulties because we were dealing with a small child. The bones are very small. The bones, during growth, many of the bones are in multiple parts. So we had additional parts of bones that we would have to consider. Some bones had not even properly, were not completely ossified yet. And it was a heavy, heavy wooded environment. Lots of surface plant material. So there are many issues we had to consider. And so we already knew where the primary area was where the skeletal remains were located. So what we decided was we would process the scene starting there. And what I instructed was everybody should be on their hands and knees. We need to be removing leaf litter. And we would be screening or double checking. All that material that was removed would go to a sifting station. So we started where the known material was and we worked out from there. It was kind of we talked about initially. And I worked the initial location where the skeletal remains were found. I felt it was best that I started that area with Susan Mears just because I was the one that would be identifying all of the bones that were found in the field.
Now, when you say, you use the word screening, what does that mean?
Okay.
How is that done?
Normally when we're doing a recovery or an excavation, all of the material that would be removed would be brought over to essentially we just like a screening box. It would be some type of mesh on the bottom of a box, and we would put all the material in there, and then there would be one or two people working each screen, and then they would thoroughly sift through all that material. And in this instance, the sheriff had set up, I think, a secondary area. Everything that was even sifted through was sifted through again.
Now, did you advise them to use a certain kind of mesh based on the kind of bones you were looking for?
Yeah, I told them to go to a smaller size screen. I mean, I think they had two sizes, and so I'd advise them that everything should be no larger than I think what standard chicken wire is. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what that size was.
Is that because of the
The bones were so small, correct, yes.
All right. I've got some. Did you have photographs? Have you seen photographs that were taken of the process that you could explain to the jury, sort of how the process went?
Say that again, please.
I'm sorry, that was a very bad question. Are there photographs that you've reviewed that show the process of this recovery to help explain to the jury exactly how it was?
Yeah, I know the Sheriff's Department, they were the ones in charge of taking all the photographs. Like I said, I was only there as an advisory role. I was not, thank you. I was only there as an advisory role, so I was not out at the scene the whole time, but we kind of set up a protocol with them, and they would document the different steps of the recovery with photographs. Were we seeing any photographs? Or
I'm going to show you some right now.
Okay.
If we could have for the witness States Exhibit EP for identification. Do you recognize this photograph, sir?
Yes, I think this one is sheriff initially set up the main area. They essentially put this, whatever you want to call it, tarp thing over here. They set up over the main area. Excuse me?
Canopy.
Thank you. Yeah, canopy over the main area.
Right. And that is was set up over the main area. You talk about the main area where the skull initially was found.
Correct, where the skull was initially found. But I could not tell you which day this is since I did not take the initial photograph. And I'm assuming it's the first day, but
Does this fairly accurately depict the appearance of the process?
Yes, this is because in this instance, what we have is one of the crime scene supervisors just showing she's on her hands and knees, which is most of the time we are on our hands and knees because of small bones. They were laying flags out where items were located so they could later map them in. Yes.
Now, this mapping process, tell the jury how that worked.
Okay. I was not in charge of the mapping process. Normally what we would want to do is document the spatial relationships of where the items are found in the field, evidence. In this instance, the Sheriff's Department was mapping in material that was found in the field. For me, they were also, mapping in all the skeletal remains. And so the whole process for them, there are multiple ways that we can actually map a scene. One of the best and most accurate ways is actually using a computerized transit, probably the total station unit. And this was part of the mapping process that was undergone by the Sheriff's Department.
And again, were you, obviously not there every day, but monitoring the progress as bones were recovered?
Ron Murdoch, if I remember correctly, was in charge of using the total station, and he did talk to me. We did discuss how that was being done. Correct.
And when remains were found, would you examine them?
Yes, if I was there. So my role, not only to advise on the recovery and to assist with some of the recovery, I was also there every day that I was in town and available. I would go out to the scene and always assess what type of bones were found or suspicious material. The sheriff needed to have an idea of which bones that were located were actually human, because one of my jobs was to assess how we needed to expand the search. So if they were finding, let's say, non-human bones, I would be able to let them know. And when they found human bones, we would discuss what was going on, which material represented human bones. This is a big part of what was involved because of this environment and the small bones.
Did the search area progressively increase based upon what was found?
Correct, yes. As we initially started in the main area, additional CSIs worked south of us, all right, also searching. And as additional human remains were located, I would talk to Susan Mears and say, okay, we're locating remains in this area, and we need to expand out further. We need to make sure. So we started with a smaller area, and that area kept expanding and expanding as additional bones were located.
At this time, you ought to move into State's Exhibit EP.
Be received in evidence the states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right. Let's see when this comes up. Doctor, if you could just kind of explain to the jury what it is they're looking at here.
It hasn't changed. The image has not changed for me.
I know it won't. They can see it now. Just you could see it before, they can see it now.
All I see still is the canopy picture.
That's what I want you to explain. When you were talking about it, they couldn't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
okay. Okay. All
now
right.
that they can see it,
Okay.
explain what you...
That makes sense. All right. So what we're looking here is some of the there are a lot of vines in the area, and like I said, I'm not sure which day this picture is from. This is just showing some of the process, and some of the process had to involve removing some of the vines and some of the overgrown plant debris, tree debris. In this area, they set up a canopy over the initial area, and we can also see, we talked about how all the debris would be collected. So we would screen that debris, and you could see there are pails out there. That's what the pails represent. All right. So every time all of the people involved that were in the field removing material, all right, they'd be on their hands and knees. They would pick up that material. They would go through it, but there's always a possibility there could be something stuck to the plant debris, and then they would place it in the pail. And that's what they're just showing, where there were pails out there. And when items were located, they would place flags out there, and the flags would have the whatever number that item was given by the sheriff's department. They would document that with photographs. And because we're dealing with such small bones, the idea was we needed to remove those bones, but the flag was placed at the location where they were found, so it could be that location could be mapped later on.
Is it important in your eventual evaluation to know where particular bones are found and in what order?
Mm-hmm. When trying to understand how the skeletal remains may have been dispersed and disarticulated at a site, you would definitely need to know where all of the skeletal remains were located.
And if you could explain the word disarticulated.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Disarticulated would mean when the bones are separated from their natural position. So disarticulation would occur at a joint, and then when the bone is separated at the joint.
All right. I'm going to unpublish to the jury and bring up State's Exhibit EQ. Do you recognize this photograph of the process? Again, just
and that's a picture just showing where the flags are being placed. My guess is there may have been some pictures taken at this point, but we see all of the flags representing where some of the items.
It's not. Hold on a second.
No problem.
That's okay. Again, this is a picture showing that process.
Correct.
All right. This time you ought to move into evidence State's Exhibit EQ.
What says the defense? Be received in evidence as.
And may I publish?
You may publish.
Now you can describe it to the jury now that they...
Okay.
One
So
second.
this is a...
Just 1 second. There's a delay. Okay. Now they can see it. Go ahead and explain it to them.
All right. This would be a close-up of, I'm assuming, the earlier picture we were looking at from a different angle. And this is just showing one of the CSIs, the one that was in charge of documentation. And my guess here is she was probably, you could see on her back, there's the camera, all right? And there are flags representing locations where items were found. And I'm having a hard time seeing the picture, but I think what she's actually doing is, it looks like in her left hand, that she has one of the envelopes for evidence collection. So she's probably collecting.
If you want to wait 1 second, we can actually zoom in.
Okay.
Perez, can you zoom in on the individual in the photograph, please? Okay. So that's what you're referring to.
Yes. So the location, the flag, she would have wrote down the specific number that was assigned to that piece of evidence, and that's written on the flag, so that flag can be mapped in later on, but she's removing that evidence and placing it in the envelope.
And that was that in fact done in this case? A mapping system was used in order to map where each bone was found.
Each bone and whatever evidence the sheriff collected, they were continually mapping everything in this process.
Thank you. Now, once bones would be found, and was part of your job to basically tell the sheriffs what was a bone and what wasn't?
Correct. And not only what was a bone and what wasn't, what was not a bone, what was non-human, and then what would be human bone.
All right. And those things that you identified as human bones would have then been transported to the medical examiner's office. Is that correct?
Yes, and I know they, I think maybe even some of the non-human stuff was probably already, because I wasn't there the entire time, so some of the other non-human bones may have already, that would have been transported, and we would have looked at those bones. I would have looked at those bones at the medical examiner's office as well.
Oh, all right. If we could go on to States ER. Do you recognize this as a photograph of some of the remains that were found?
Yes, these are vertebrae.
Hold on. Before you describe it, we have to have it in evidence. Okay?
No problem.
At this time, I move into evidence, States Exhibit ER.
We received an evidence in states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right, Dr. Schultz, what are we looking at in this photograph?
We are looking at a number of vertebrae, so part of the spine. And what we can see here is the vertebrae are disarticulated, separated. They're not together anymore. There's no soft tissue. Thank you. There's no soft tissue. We can see roots growing throughout the vertebra as well. And I would like to point out that because we're dealing with a child, and I mentioned earlier how when we grow, our bones do not grow as whole units. They grow in pieces to allow the growth. So what we can see here is all of these vertebrae, except for the furthest one on the right, they're in separate pieces. But what's very important about this picture, we can see here that in order for all
Doctor,
of
let me stop for a second. If you want to, that's a telestrator screen.
Okay.
If you need to refer to something, you can just touch the screen and circle it, and it will make a
okay.
mark.
All right,
So,
thank you. All right, so I was saying the vertebra on the my right, here we can see the back of the vertebra, so this is the body. What's interesting from my perspective when we look at this image, here's a vertebra where the body's separated. All the other ones are separated. And all of these bones were found in one location. So it would have to tell you that these bones were transported while they were still held together. Not only all the vertebrae held together, but the parts of the vertebra held together with some soft tissue.
And was this particular set of bones found at a different location than the skull?
Yes, these were found at a different location.
And we'll discuss that more later, but that's significant in terms of how they got transported.
Correct.
All right. We go on to States Exhibit ES. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. EW was the next one we wanted on the list. I apologize. Do you recognize this particular item?
Yes.
Is that a photograph of one of the bones found that you
That's a photograph of a bone fragment.
bone fragment. This time you're going to move into evidence, States Exhibit EW.
We received an evidence in states numbered.
May I publish?
You may.
This particular bone, again, we see a bone and then we see a manila envelope, I guess, with some writing on it. Is that what you were talking about, how each bone is documented as to where it came from?
Correct.
All right. This also indicates 6 inches deeper below large roots. That's how they would indicate where they found it?
They would have information on the bag. Now, on this one, I'm not sure, but this one may have actually been found in the sift. And what they were trying to do was locate where the person that recovered these remains was in what area of the site they were at.
All right. So this was actually covered in sifting, not something that was found.
I think so because she says lane 5, but so that's what I think this may have been a sift bone.
All right. So you said this is a fragment from another bone.
Correct.
All right. Just one moment. If we could have State's Exhibit, I mean unpublished, State's Exhibit FA. Now, let me clear the annotation. Do you recognize this as a photograph of two of the bones that were found in the in this case?
Yes.
This time moving to evidence, State's Exhibit FA. FA.
There being no objection, it would be receiving evidence that states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
What are these bones that we're looking at in this exhibit?
We're looking at right now the largest bones in the body. Those would be the shafts of the femora. So those would be your lower leg bones that attach to the pelvis.
And does this, could we have a split screen between this and the last exhibit that we put in, which was EW? EW. Now, in your opinion, do these two bones relate to each other?
Yes, they do. If we look at the image with the two bones on the left, what we're looking at here, the top of the bones, these have actually been chewed on by animals. This bone here actually is a fragment that you can actually put right back into place there.
Okay?
I'll unpublish this while we're doing that.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and now is the time for our recess. We will be in recess to 25 to the hour of 11. You may be seated. Okay, let the record reflect that the defendant is present along with counsel for the defendant, assistant state attorneys, both sides ready to proceed. All right, let's return to jury. Okay, state recognized presence of jury
Yes, sir.
and the defense. Okay, you may continue.
Doctor, when we stopped, we were discussing the significance of the two photographs we had on the screen. Can we get those split screens back up? Without spending too much more time on this, this bone in State's exhibit for identification, EW, that is now in evidence. Clerk may have to help me on that one. This is the small piece of bone. 244. Thank you. Make a note. Is it your belief that that piece of bone essentially fits into this area of the bone in the other photograph, which was FA and is now 245?
Presently, my monitor is not working.
Oh, that's because nobody's is on yet. Okay, I'm sorry. I turned him off during the bench conference. Sorry about that. You see the parts I've circled.
Yes, I see the images now.
Is that what you were trying to say, is that you think that this bone came from that area right there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, we can take them down now. All right. If I could now have FB for identification. And do you recognize this as a photograph that was taken of, technology's getting to me. Do you recognize this as a photograph of bones that were taken at your direction?
Yes, this is a photograph representing primarily hand and finger bones.
This time,
And-
later, moving to evidence states exhibit FB.
What says the defense? We received an evidence that states numbered.
246.
What is the purpose of this photograph, Doctor?
Did you want to publish, Mr.?
I'm sorry, yes, I would like to publish it.
Okay, I'll operate the publish from now.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
It'd probably be safer. What's the purpose of this photograph?
We're always going to document all of the skeletal remains during analysis, so that would be the first part. So we would take multiple views of the skull, multiple views of the skeleton, and then parts of the skeleton. So this particular image was documenting the bones that were located, essentially for the hands, and our scientific scales in the middle of the screen are in centimeters. So I placed a quarter in the picture to provide perspective as to how small these bones actually were.
This is just an attempt to demonstrate to the jury that how tiny these
Yeah, they're very, and these were bones we found during the recovery. Some may have been found in the screen, but many of these were found in the main area.
Now, how long did this recovery effort take from start to finish?
I'm trying to remember.
If you need to refer to your notes,
Yeah,
Go
because,
ahead.
let me refer to my notes. The initial was December 11th when the sheriff was out at the scene with Steve Hansen. And then I think it occurred up until the mapping was finished on December 20th.
December 20th. All right. Now, let's go back. We can unpublish to the jury, please. And let's go to State's Exhibit EZ. you recognize this as a photograph of two of the bones that were found during the recovery?
Yes.
This time that I moved to Evidence States Exhibit EZ.
Be received in evidence. You wish to publish.
I do. Now, these particular bones, is there some significance to these bones that you would like to describe to the jury?
These bones represent part of the pelvis. So if you were to, with your hands, palpate your waist, you generally would be palpating the top area of your pelvis. So since we're dealing with a child, each one of these, they're called os coxa, would grow as 3 bones, and then through the maturity process, they would fuse. So what we're looking at are the top parts of each os coxa. This one here, we do have some carnivore damage on the bottom and some adipocere here as well.
And what is adipocere?
Adipocere would just be a conversion of fats in the body into essentially a wax.
Is, in your overall opinion of the taphonomy of this case, is where one of these bones was found significant?
One of these, yes, was found almost completely buried in the muck.
And you're going to explain later why that's significant.
Yes.
Okay. Which one of these was that?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd have to check notes.
That's fine. You need to check your notes? Go ahead.
The left.
The left in this picture?
Yes.
All right. Judge, if we could unpublish now, please. And if I could have State's Exhibit FC. Now, Doctor, do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, that is a picture of the skeleton laid out essentially in anatomical order after all of the bones are recovered.
And at this time, you got to move to Evidence States Exhibit FC.
Be received in evidence the state's number. Publish.
Yes, please. Doctor, how successful was this recovery effort?
Generally, when we're recovering a skeleton that's not only been dispersed at a site, but it's also been susceptible to dispersal from carnivore activity, even with an adult skeleton where bones are completely intact, it's very difficult to collect the majority of the skeletal remains, and it's also very difficult to to collect many of the teeth. I feel we were very, very successful here. We collected all but one tooth. We have most of the spine, many of the ribs, all the long bones, and then the tiny bones, hands, feet, left foot, and we did recover one bone of the right foot. The only reason we had one bone of the right foot because there was carnivore activity in that part of the skeleton.
And the only part missing is the...
For the most part, there are a few pieces here and there missing.
Had enough of that. So this 9-day effort, would you say that it was a successful effort in terms of your experience with this kind of recovery efforts?
Yes, I would say very successful in terms of what was recovered and mapping the location of all those bones as well.
And were you provided with the information and the mapping about where the various bones were?
Yes, Ronald Murdoch, one of the CSI supervisors of the Sheriff's Department, he was in charge of the mapping, and he had provided me with all the locations.
Right. And is that the type of information that you would normally utilize in coming to an opinion as to taphonomy and forensic anthropology?
When you say type of information, can you specify, please?
Is it the type of information that you as an expert would normally use in coming to opinions?
Yes, we would need to know spatial relationships of all of the bones out at the site in relationship to the dump site, and we would want to have things mapped out.
Right. For us to show the witness State's Exhibit QG. Do you recognize this as a survey which denotes the specific areas where various groupings of bones were found.
Yes.
Would it be helpful to you to use this in explaining to the jury the dispersal of the various bones?
Yes.
This time you ought to move into Evidence States Exhibit QG.
Exhibit will be received in evidence of states numbered. Published.
Please. Now, Mr. Perez, if we could zoom in on this area. Let me clear the annotation. Now, Doctor, does this part of the survey essentially give us all of the areas where bones were found?
Yes, it does.
Okay. If you could just explain, and do you have a specific listing of what was found in each area?
In terms of the bones, yes.
Okay. Well, if you need to refer to that to refresh your recollection, just
Okay.
let us know you're doing it and go right ahead.
What I would like to do when I explain this is just provide a generalization of the different bones, not provide an itemized list because
Absolutely
it'd
fine.
be too long. Okay.
Just
All right.
start with Area A. What is Area A?
Okay. Area A. Do I need to highlight here?
If you want to, you may.
Okay. Area A in the image here is going to be what we feel is probably most likely the primary depositional area. So where the body and mass of bags, the body being in the bags, was placed into the woods. This would have been where the initial separation of some of the body parts occurred, such as the skull, the arms, the lower limbs would have separated here. And then what we're able to do is, as I walk through here, is talk about how the skeleton, as it was dispersed at the scene, we can follow along with which parts were actually separated at specific locations. And so if we look at when I was working with the Sheriff's Department, advising them on which areas to focus our efforts and how to expand, I initially started in Area A, and then we had people in Area B, not Area B, but south of Area A. So if we're looking at this picture, north would be the top of the image. So when we initially started with our search, I was with Susan Mears in Area A. The rest of the crime scene investigators were south of us. And as additional skeletal remains were found, we moved further south.
Okay, just one second. If you want to designate a new area of search, you could do it in a different color.
Well, I'm just doing a generalization, okay,
Right.
because this whole entire area was searched. So what I'm trying to say is, as we were in Area A, we also had people outside here working across this way. And then when this entire area was searched, what I would do is talk to Susan Mears, go through with her what the progress was for the day. We'd talk about where skeletal remains were located, and then we would talk about how to expand the search. So, for example, as Area F, Area G, more material was found, the search progressed further south. All right, and as it was progressing south, what I did at that point was we talked in terms of where bones were located, and I said we needed to expand west and east, and that's how we located additional bones further out.
So was this a progressive?
Yeah, so we want to start with the known and then progress out from the known and keep expanding until no more bones are located.
So once you got to a point where you weren't finding anything, then...
Well, when that whole area was completely cleared, okay, and cleared means surface debris, and even the ground was going to be scraped with trowels, all right?
And that was done over this entire area that you've...
Yes,
Right.
yes. And the sheriff would be able to provide the exact location,
Sure.
all right? All I was provided, I worked with Ron Murdoch to produce this map, and all I told him was I wanted the location for where all the bones were found on a scene map where I could then talk about dispersal and what we're discussing now.
Very good. Let me get rid of your annotations here for a moment. So, generally, what was found in Area A?
Okay.
As
Okay.
skeletal
Area A would have been. Sorry.
Just a second. You cannot talk at the same time. there's a question, let there be a break, then let there be a moderate, deliberate answer. If not, the court reporter will not be able to take a thing down, and the record will be shot. Proceed.
Yes, sir. So tell us, if you will, what skeletal remains were found in Area A?
Area A was the initial area where they located the skull, the bags, where additional bones that were found there. As a generalization, the arms with hand bones were found there. The lower legs were also found there with the left foot.
How about Area B, the area closest to A? What was found there?
Left B was the shaft for the upper arm bone, the humerus.
All right. And the next closest, I guess, would be the biggest area, Area F. What was found there?
As we progressed further, I guess that would be a southeastern direction. In Area F, what we can see happened here, the trunk of the body with the pelvis and the lower legs more than likely was dragged to this area, because what we see only in this area, we see primarily there are some additional bones, but we do find both lower leg bones and part of the pelvis, and some other bones are located here as well.
And those would be a connected anatomical unit.
Yes, so at this point we probably have being dragged away from Area A by an animal or animals would be the trunk with the lower, both femora attached to the pelvis, still all articulated.
All right. What further dispersal can you describe for this diagram?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to point out Area D. All right. That's the area where we had only located one bone.
This is over to the far left of the diagram. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the only bone we found for the right foot, and that did exhibit carnivore damage, which documented what we believe clearly was going on at this site, that Area D, animals had dispersed. And we said, then we go back to Area E. We didn't talk about Area E. That was a hand bone found there.
Let me ask you one question about Area D before you get off that. You said that was the one bone. Is that the one bone of the foot that no other bones were found?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so go ahead. You were going to, I think, Area E. Is that what's the next one you're talking about?
Yes, Area E was just one hand bone.
That's off here in the top of the picture. That's Area E?
Correct. Yes, that's Area E.
Okay. You told us about Area F. How about Area G?
Okay. So if I could just explain further, Area F
Sure.
is where, Area F is where we did see carnivore damage on multiple bones. And Area G, all right, at this point to Area G, we more than likely had most of the spinal column, so most of the vertebrae still together with many of the ribs attached. And what we see separating out at this area would be the bottom of the spinal column, or the lower vertebrae that would have separated here.
And that's in Area G?
Correct, Area G.
Again, is that consistent with, again, an animal moving?
Yes, still be consistent. Like I said, there was damage to the pelvis area. That part of the spinal column would attach to the pelvis, make a part of the pelvis.
How about Area H?
Area H, we start to see more of the ribs that are disarticulated or separated at this point. Okay, and so ribs. There are some other little bones, but I'll just if I just use a generalization, like I said, I would.
Sure. How about Area I? I guess is the last one we.
Yes, Area I. At this point, we have not up until Area H. We haven't seen most of the spine. So what's interesting about Area I is if we start at the top of the spine, we first have the cervical vertebra, 7 of those. Then we go to the thoracic vertebra, 12. And then we go to the lumbar vertebra, 5. So that's 24 vertebra. If we go to Area I, we found 20 of the vertebra there. So this would be consistent at this point as the trunk is being dragged through the woods. The bones that are not held on with as many potential ligaments, there's going to be more ligaments helping to support the spinal column to hold it together, so it's consistent with that part of the spinal column being dragged while it's relatively articulated. And as I mentioned earlier, almost all of these vertebra may even be two parts because they have not fused yet due to growth. So it's consistent with this potentially as a whole anatomical unit, a whole block being dragged to area I where decomposition would have occurred, continued there, finished.
In order for that to occur, would it be correct that the skeleton would not have to be completely skeletonized? There had to be some tissue connecting these bones in order for them to be moved as a unit.
Yes, there would have had to have been some tissue holding the bones together, correct.
Have we covered all the areas now? I think we have.
Yes, we spoke about all the areas.
All right. Now, based upon this dispersal pattern, do you have an opinion as to whether this body was deposited in Area A as a complete, intact unit?
It may have been relatively intact. I don't know exactly if it was a complete unit because it would have been in the bags, but it would have been, we still would have had, if we look clearly at Area F, clearly the trunk and lower legs would have still been all articulated. I couldn't tell you if all the other parts, whether or not they had separated yet, the ones that were found in the locations closer to the road.
Just so we're clear, there is no indication that the body was dismembered by using any kind of tool or anything like that.
No, we did not. We did not see any evidence.
Right. Whatever separation occurred was through the natural process of decomposition.
Correct. Would have been natural.
Now, based upon the dispersal pattern, and there's one particular bone that we talked about, the hip bone, and I forget what your technical term for it was, that we talked about in one photograph you said was buried in something. Can you explain to the jury what the significance of the way that bone was found is to your ultimate opinion about taphonomy?
When trying to interpret how long the bones may have been at the site and also how they were dispersed.
Okay. You may continue.
Actually, before he answers, I realize I have not gone through the formal process. I would ask the court to recognize the witness as an expert in the area of forensic anthropology to give opinions in the area, though he's already done that. I've never formally requested, so I would at this time.
Any objections, Mr. Mason? The witness will be accepted as an expert witness in the areas tended by the prosecution.
Thank you. So explain to us about this particular bone and its significance in your opinion.
Ilium?
Yes,
okay.
The ilium, the left
right.
ilium.
When trying to interpret the dispersal at the scene and how long the skeleton may have been out at the scene, many of the bones were located underneath the leaf fall. So that would let us know that the bones had to have been there prior to the leaf fall. And then we had, particularly with this ilium, the bone was nearly buried. So that would at least have to tell us, more than likely, this area was, I guess simplest way to may say it was a swampy area. There was water south or southeast. And so it's quite possible that when the area was filled up with water, the whole area was flooded, that as somehow the action from the water, silt, or other material that may have been suspended in the water may have resulted in the burial of this particular bone, which would have occurred sometime over the summer.
Now, when you say buried, can you describe more how you mean, how it was found? Was it deep down in the dirt? Was it just in the mud? How was it?
Okay, it was close to a big palmetto trunk, and which was I think was one of the lower areas. I cannot give you an exact measurement, but I know area F. If we looked at the topographic map, that is the lowest area. So more than likely, when the whole trunk was brought in there, that is one of the bones with carnivore damage. Somehow it was deposited in that particular location. And there's going to be silt and other material suspended in water as water moves, be picked up, and that process would have eventually led to almost burying this bone.
Now, based upon all of this evidence that you've seen here, that you've discussed, do you have an opinion as to the taphonomy in this case, as to approximately how long you believe these remains were in that area?
Okay. When we're trying to interpret time since death, we're going to use, like I was talking about, multiple lines of evidence. This is one of the reasons why we want to document the location of all the bones, trying to understand the dispersal. And overall, the bones were dry, all right, which would suggest it dry, not only completely free of soft tissue, but dry. Bones are all going to have marrow in them. There's going to be fat in them. So even when the tissue first decomposes off the bones can still have a moist touch. There can also still be decomposition odor. So these bones were completely dry. They were not, no decomposition odor. There was some slight erosion on many of the bones, which would take time. Found under the leaf litter, one bone was practically buried. In combination of that with some of the root evidence, what I pretty much said in my report, it would not be a period of around 6 months could be possible.
All right. And is it your opinion, based upon, again, the examination of this, that the dispersal of the bones was a result of animal activity?
I would say primarily a result of animal activity when we're finding animal activity directly on the bones in some of these areas. And I don't, off the top of my head, I need to look at my report, at least on one of them. I mean, there was some animal chewing even on a couple of the ribs that we did know. And, that's one thing. This area was processed very well. They were all missing bones, and they were, in this instance, taken away by animals. They could have been chewed and nothing left of the bone after that.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
You ready?
Yes.
Now, as a forensic anthropologist, amongst the things you do is not only help or direct the location of bones, but you examine the bones yourself.
Correct.
And did you, in fact, X-ray bones?
The bones were X-rayed.
Something you directed?
We normally, when I work a case, I will always ask, okay, do we have these X-ray views? And if not, I will ask for them.
In your examination of the bones and the X-raying of the bones, sir, isn't it true you found no evidence of any pre-mortem trauma?
No, there was no evidence of perimortem trauma.
Meaning no prior childhood broken bones, fractures, any such thing?
Are you asking antemortem trauma?
I'm sorry?
I'm not sure if your question, if you were asking, did we find, I think you asked me two separate questions.
All right. Well,
okay. Go ahead.
Let me start over. Sometimes the acoustics in here are weird, and I can't hear well anyway. So, you found no evidence of any fractures, correct?
No evidence of fractures.
And no evidence of any twists or torquing of bones?
No evidence.
no evidence of anything to indicate to you that this child had ever had any traumatic injury whatsoever before her death.
No evidence.
Now, sir, you have before you, or did you give him a paper copy of the map? Map.
Yes.
Thank you. Print on that too small for me to attempt to read, sir. Would you look at it? Can you tell us how far Area A was from the pavement of the road, Suburban Drive?
If I use the scale, like I said, I did not do the mapping, but if I use the scale on the mapping, without having a ruler in front of me, I would think 25 to 30 feet maybe.
Area A?
To the edge of the road, right?
Did you participate in the measurements at all?
I did not, no, I said that earlier. I did not document the measurements. The measurements were collected with a total station, and they also had a 3D scanner.
So this map only shows different elevations and lines that would show the elevations?
Yes, and the total state, excuse me, a 3D scanner was brought in, and that's why I said earlier, I did not do the measurements. My job was not the mapping. The measurements were provided to me.
Who provided the measurements to you?
Ronald Murdoch. Ronald Murdoch. And he didn't, what he provided to me was, he didn't necessarily provide measurements. The way that map was created, him and I looked through all of the data points for each of the flags, and then I came up with the different locations based on the concentration of bones, and then that map was created for me.
Okay, so when I ask you if you know specifically how far the beginning of Area A and where the skull was from the edge of the pavement, you can't tell me.
If you give me a ruler, I could.
Well, fresh out. Okay. Do you know, sir, when the disbursement took place?
I'm not sure I understand the question when you say when.
Well, we start with Area A. And Area A, you say, was the primary site where the skull, the bags, arms, hand bone, lower leg bone, and so forth are located, right?
Yes.
Okay. And all of those items were in bags, right?
Originally, yes.
Originally, before you had to reconstruct it and set it out as you did in the exhibit.
Well, I would assume when I say in bags, originally when deposited out at the site.
Okay. And from the site was gathered the plastic bags, the laundry bag, the skull with bones in it. You know that. You saw it.
Correct.
All right. But the other areas where there were some bones or fragments, there were no bags, correct?
No bag. Well, excuse me. No bags. I could not tell you parts of bags. That I could not tell you since that was not my job to analyze that material.
So then the majority of what would be found and in a bag and so forth was all Area A, right?
Can you repeat
The
that, please?
majority of the skull and the bones that we talked about, the majority of it was in the bags from Area A.
I wouldn't necessarily say majority, and I would say found in the area. What you're referring to, I would say correct. The majority of that skeletal material was found in the area of A.
And it was only after inspecting the content of the remains from Area A that you discovered there's missing bones. Right?
I don't know. I wouldn't agree with that because we would too when we started processing the scene. We did have people in other areas of the scene we were processing at the same time, and people were locating additional bones in south of Area A before we had Area A completely processed.
The initial find was Area A.
Correct.
Then after looking what you got, then you spread it out. You drew a map where you said, go east, go south, go west.
We had a whole crew of people, so we separated them out in different areas, and we were searching simultaneously.
And that's when some found different bones and little pieces, as you have shown us.
Yes.
And then brought them back, and you did your best to reassemble the skeleton.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, you don't have any scientific evidence to tell us when the first disbursement from Area A occurred, do you?
I cannot provide you a specific time period, no.
And same question as to areas B, C, D, E, F, G, and I.
Yes.
And there's nothing in your work, and in this case, that tells you how this child died. Isn't that correct, sir?
That's not a question that I would answer, and I did not. All I would look for would be perimortem trauma, and we did not find any perimortem trauma.
And when you studied some of the remains and looked at duct tape, you did, right?
On the skull, I did not analyze it. I looked at the duct tape on the skull, but I did not look at and analyze the duct tape itself.
And duct tape was not covering the nasal aperture, was it, sir?
No.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Redirect.
What's a nasal aperture? What's a nasal aperture?
Nasal aperture is the hole on the skull where the nasal area would be.
So it's what, if you took everything else away, the opening where the nose would be.
Correct. If you were to remove the nose, the nasal aperture would be that hole. Correct.
And the tape wasn't covering the entire nasal aperture. Is that what you said?
The tape was covering the mouth area.
The mouth area.
Yeah.
Do you know whether the tape was in a position where it would have covered the nose had it been there, or do you just don't know?
Possibly, but based on what I saw, there's no way to say that exactly.
Okay. Because not to be indelicate, the nose wasn't there anymore.
Correct.
I'm going to need to, if I may have just a moment, what is the full skeleton? And that is, could I publish 248 in evidence, Judge, please?
Yeah. As soon as it gets up on the screen.
Sir.
Publish 248.
Mr. Mason asked you a question and may use the word the majority of the bones be in one place or another. If you could circle on this, what bones were found in Area A to the best of generally?
Can I
If you need
refer to my notes?
Refer to your report. That'd be fine.
And this is not an exact?
Sure.
Okay.
Just in general.
Yeah, so we have skull area here. This was not, but we had some of the bones in here.
Okay. Just in a general sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a general.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Let me look here. I forgot here. Sorry about that. And we may have something here. I'd have to refer specifically to notes. One of the fibula may have been there, but
That's fine. So generally, that's what was in Area A.
correct.
All right. What was in area? Get my glasses too. What was in area B?
When I put the X on the left humerus, before I said that was not there because that was located.
That was in the area closest to
Yes,
area A.
yes, close by.
Sorry. That was in area B, the closest to area A. Correct.
Yes, that would be correct.
Right. What was in area F? That was the larger area on the diagram.
Area F, it appears a little larger because the dispersal was out a little further. But in area F, we do have the clavicles, which are your collarbones. And then we have parts of the pelvis and the proximal ends of both femora, okay, the shafts. And we do have some ribs. And one part of a vertebra.
That's in area F. Correct?
Yes.
All right. What parts do we have in area G?
Area G, what we see in area G is that's where we see some separation of the bottom or distal end of the spinal column there. And then area G, we had a couple ribs.
Okay. How about area H?
Area H, we only had one part of one rib. Part of one vertebra, sorry. And then we had a bunch of ribs, and I don't have exact ones in front of me.
And how about area I?
Area I, we see more ribs, but I don't have the exact vertebra, but we had close to 20, we had 20 vertebra, parts representing 20 vertebra.
We can get rid of that photo now, please. No further questions.
Any recross as to those issues? No, sir. May the doctor be excused. Yes, sir. Thank you, doctor. You may be excused, sir.
Thank you.
You solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. Mr. Please. My name is Dr. Jan Garavaglia, Garavaglia.
May I proceed?
You may proceed.
Good morning, doctor.
Good morning.
How are you presently employed?
I'm the chief medical examiner for Orange and Osceola counties.
And how long have you held that job?
I've been chief medical examiner since 2004.
Prior to being the chief medical examiner for District 9, where were you employed?
I was the deputy chief for a little less than a year, and then I was employed as a medical examiner in Bexar County, which is San Antonio, Texas, for 10 years, and prior to that, in the metropolitan Atlanta area, and I've been a medical examiner also in Jacksonville, Florida, and I trained as a medical examiner in Miami.
If you could just take us through your educational experience that led you to your work as a medical examiner.
Sure. I'm a MD, medical doctor. That degree was from St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri, graduating in 1982. I then did my internship in internal medicine at the University Hospitals in St. Louis. I then specialized in pathology, both anatomic and clinical pathology, Anatomic pathology is basically the doctor at the hospital that looks under the microscope, does hospital autopsies, diagnoses diseases, and I'm board certified in that. That training was at the University Hospitals in St. Louis. I'm also trained in clinical pathology. That is basically the doctor that runs the laboratories. I'm board certified in that. I then subspecialized in forensic pathology. That is the field of pathology that specializes in why people die suddenly and unexpectedly. And it deals with ballistics through the body. It deals with injury interpretation. And that training was in Miami, 87 and 88. And I'm board certified in forensic pathology.
And after your educational experience, you became a medical examiner. You've told us where you've worked.
Yes, I just...
All right, taking up to today. Now, did you have occasion to become involved in the investigation of the death of Kaylee Marie Anthony?
Yes, that came under under my jurisdiction.
Now, when did you first learn of the possibility that the remains of Kaylee Anthony had been found?
That would have been on the 11th. I don't remember the time. Sometime in late morning, early afternoon.
Were you alerted by law enforcement?
I was alerted by my chief investigator, Steve Hansen.
Upon learning of that, what did you do?
I was late for the airport. I had already left the building, had run back in to pick up something that I'd forgotten. As I was walking out, Mr. Hansen told me that they had found the remains. And we weren't sure who that is for sure at that point. Oftentimes these scene recoveries take a long period of time. I had a engagement that I could not get out of. I was late for the airport, so I immediately contacted Dr. Utz and told him to initially handle it till I got back. I would be back the next day. I told Steve to make sure that Dr. Schultz was called. He's my anthropologist that's our consultant. And I believe I might have even talked to Dr. Schultz myself. I can't remember. But I made sure he was involved, and I made sure Dr. Utz was able to handle it. I thought that initially, typically how we handle skeletal cases is that it takes a while for the recovery. They're brought in, they sit, and then we analyze. And it's a long process. I didn't think my absence for the night would matter.
Sure. Now, when you returned, you returned the following day?
Yes, that was Thursday. I returned Friday evening.
When you returned the following evening and for the days and weeks after that, did you go back and review the photographs that had been taken both at the scene prior to the skull's removal and those taken at your facility while you were gone? Have you reviewed all those photographs?
Absolutely.
Now, once you arrived back and took the case back from Dr. Utz, did you continue to investigate and photograph additional items that were taken with the body?
Yes, I did. Case was discussed. I went out to the scene. I reviewed all the photographs. I made some suggestions for what else needed to be done, and made sure that we got some other different other consultants in also.
Just a moment. If we may start by showing the witness State's Exhibit CX in evidence. CX. I think you might have to. It doesn't really matter. Is one of the things that you examined when you arrived back the hair mat which was surrounding the skull?
Eventually, that hair mat came back to me. It was sent to the FBI, and I asked for that back.
All right.
And that was sent back to me, and I examined it then.
Is this a photograph that was taken before it was that you reviewed, or is this one that was taken after it came back?
Looks like there's bone. It's oftentimes when you show me one picture and it's not in context,
Sure.
It's difficult to say, but it looks like there's still bone attached. So,
Would this have been one of the photographs you reviewed?
oh, this would have been one that I reviewed, certainly.
All right. Let me go to photograph CY. Again, is this a photograph that you took or reviewed?
Yes.
All right. At this time, I'd move into evidence states exhibit CX and CY.
What says the defense? Be receiving evidence, the state's numbered.
Let's start with formerly CX. We published that to the jury.
Okay, publish.
All right. Doctor, can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
We're looking at the hair mat of the decedent of the case 81567.
What else do we see in the photograph other than hair?
We see a lot of the roots that have grown through the hair.
And now if we could see what was CY. And this is in evidence as 251. And again, what are we looking at here, Doctor?
We're also looking at the hair mat. We're also looking at the roots that have grown completely through the hair mat, and we're also looking at some holes. I don't know if you can. Holes in the hair mat, probably from insect activity.
Let's unpublish to the jury and move on to DA. You recognize this photograph?
Yes, that's a photograph that we teased out some of the hair to take as a sample. This was teased out from that hair mat to take as a sample for possible toxicologic use.
Right. And does this photograph also show a scale showing the length of the hair?
Yes.
This time you ought to move into evidence states exhibit DA.
It will be received in evidence states numbered. You want to publish?
Yes, please. Again, the scale that you have here is to change my glasses, I'm sorry, 6-inch scale?
Yes.
All right, so this would reflect the length of the hair being at least more than 6 inches.
That is correct.
All right, thank you. All right. And we may unpublish, Judge. Yes, we'll finish. I'm sorry, I said we may unpublish. Thank you. And if we could have DC in evidence. And you recognize this is one of the photographs taken either at your direction or by your office.
Yes, that was actually taken at my direction. Again, that's the scale next to one of the roots on the hair mat.
This is just, and the purpose of the scale is to allow someone to compare the size of the root with a scale in the same picture. This time, I've got to move into evidence states exhibit DC.
Be received in evidence the states numbered. Publish.
Yes, please. That's fine, Your Honor. We can unpublish now. Now, some of the items that were found with the remains, did you examine and separately photograph a number of those?
Yes.
I want to specifically ask you about a blanket. Do you recall there being a baby blanket that was found?
Yes.
Right. And did you have that photographed?
Yes.
This time, could we show the witness DV? Do you recognize this as a photograph of the blanket taken at your direction?
That was either taken at my direction or by someone in my staff. It's been photographed. It was photographed several times.
All right. This time, you've got to move into evidence states exhibit DV.
Be received in evidence the states numbered.
May we publish? This particular blanket, this is the condition that it came into your office. Is that correct? Hasn't been cleaned or anything like that?
It was not cleaned or it was just kind of unfolded.
Are there certain portions of this blanket where you can detect some figures?
Yes.
Did you ask your staff to did they take a closer photograph to show those figures more clearly?
I might have even taken that photograph. I remember taking some, yes.
All right. If we could unpublish the jury, which I've done, and show the witness D.W. And you recognize this photograph, D.W.?
Yes.
And is this the closer photograph trying to show the figures on the blanket?
Yes, it is.
And this time you ought to remove Evidence States Exhibit D.W.
Any objections? Be received in evidence the states numbered.
And may we publish?
Publish.
Now, I'm going to ask Mr. Perez to zoom in on this figure. When you viewed that figure, did it look familiar to you?
Yes.
Who's that?
Winnie the Pooh with Piglet on its back.
Thank you. We're all done with that photo. If we could show the witness DX. And is this a photograph of the other side of that blanket?
Yes, it is.
This time you ought to move into Evidence States Exhibit DX.
Be received in evidence the states numbered.
And may I publish?
May.
Did that blanket have some plant material growing in it?
Yes.
And did you have that photographed as well to document the level of plant activity in the blanket?
Yes, I did.
And unpublished to the jury. And if I may have DZ. Is that a photograph representing the amount of plant and root activity actually growing into the blanket?
Yes, it is.
State would move into Evidence States Exhibit DZ.
What says the defense?
DZ.
Be received in evidence the states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
So just tell us what we're looking at here.
This is a close-up of the edge of the blanket, the one with the Winnie the Pooh with Piglet. And it shows vegetative material, roots growing on top of and through the blanket.
Thank you. We could go to E, show the witness EB, please. EB. Do you recognize this as an additional photograph of other areas of root growth in the blanket?
Yes.
Right. This time moved to Evidence States Exhibit EB.
What says the defense? Be received in evidence the states numbered.
Look, for the record, that's ED. I apologize. I said EB. I meant ED. Okay. And may we publish?
You may publish.
Now, if we could have EB as in boy. You recognize this as another photograph of the root material.
Yes.
State removed to Evidence States Exhibit EB.
What says the defense? Be received in evidence the states numbered.
And publish, please.
You may.
Again, we're looking at more root material in that blanket.
That is correct.
Unpublished to the jury. Unpublished. Could I have State's Exhibit EE? Do you recognize EE?
Yes, I do.
This is a photograph of more root material growing into the blanket. Is that
That's the
correct?
same blanket with showing root material growing into it.
State removed evidence, State's Exhibit EE.
We received an evidence that states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Was there also root material growing in the bag, that is the black plastic bag that was found with the remains?
There are 2 black plastic bags, and root material is growing through the holes in both those bags.
Let me show you, if we can show the witness EI. Does this photograph demonstrate the root material growing actually through the holes in the black plastic bag?
Yes.
This time, State removed evidence, State's Exhibit EI.
We received an evidence that states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Was there also a canvas laundry bag that was also found with the remains that you saw?
Yes, there was.
And were there roots growing within that item as well?
The canvas laundry bag was canvas on the outside and some type of kind of shiny vinyl type material on the inside, and it appears that the roots were just growing on top of and intricately applied to the canvas part of that bag.
If we may show the witness EN. And do you recognize that as a representative photograph showing the roots growing into the canvas bag?
Yes.
This time I move into evidence, State's Exhibit EN.
We received the states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Would it be fair to say that roots, plant roots, were growing in and around virtually everything that was retrieved from this scene, that is the immediate area of the skull?
No, I don't think we saw any roots in the shorts.
Okay.
There were certainly roots in bones, but that was further out. Roots through the bag, and then the shirt was completely disintegrated, so it's difficult to say. But certainly the blanket, the 2 plastic bags, and the canvas bag.
And you said the shirt was disintegrated. All that was left was the lettering and a collar?
The lettering and the stitching along the hems and with the tag.
In order to assist, and I'll just unpublish that, in order to assist in identifying the victim in this case, well, at the time that the bones were first found, how did you go about trying to identify who this child was?
Well, we thought the best identification was going to be through DNA. It's difficult to identify a child because oftentimes we'll use teeth or a dental comparison that was be difficult with this child because she's so young. And so we were hoping that we were going to get nuclear DNA, and then we knew that there would probably be at least mitochondrial DNA. So we thought the best way to go would be with the DNA.
And did your office send a bone off to the FBI laboratory for purposes of DNA identification?
Yes, we did.
Let me show the witness State's Exhibit EO for identification. You recognize this as a photograph of the bone upon its return from the DNA evaluation.
Yes.
Right. This time, the auditor state would move into evidence State's Exhibit EO.
What says the defense? Be received in evidence the state's numbered.
Yeah, publish. Doctor, the portion that's missing from this bone, is that a procedure you're familiar with in determining DNA identification from bone?
Yes, they have to remove a piece of the bone to test, so they removed a piece of that right tibia.
Now, did you receive results from the FBI DNA laboratory as to the identification of the remains?
Yes.
And did that laboratory identify the remains as that is Kaylee Marie Anthony?
Yes, they did.
Now, as a medical examiner, is it your job to determine two things, one called cause of death and one called manner of death?
Yes, that's the fundamental, it's fundamental to my job, and that's basically why we exist as an office.
Is manner of death determination a purely medical or scientific determination?
Yes, the cause?
Manner of death.
The manner of death, it's based on scientific principles and ultimately gathering all the information you can about a case, all the circumstances of the case, all the history of the case, any medical history, knowing what the body showed, knowing all your ancillary tests. It's to take all of those things into consideration and any type of scientific information and to come up with an opinion.
Counsel, I don't need to quote. Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to recess now for lunch. I'm going to ask you not to discuss this case among yourselves nor with anyone else. Any additional instructions on behalf of the state or the defense? Okay, we'll be in recess to 1:30.